Remember late April 2025? That huge power outage hitting Spain and Portugal? It was all over the news.
Yeah, April 28th. It just brought everything to a standstill, didn't it? Really makes you think about our energy grids.
Totally. And the scale. Spain losing 15 gigawatts, it's like, what, 60% of their power needs? Gone in seconds. Just vanished.
It's staggering. A real wake-up call.
And for you listening, always wanting to get to the heart of these big events fast, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Because this wasn't just, a small technical glitch. This blackout really shines a light on some huge issues.
Especially with all the changes happening, bringing more renewables online.
Exactly. It touches on those underlying tensions in how our energy systems are connected and evolving.
Right. So our mission today, we're going to really dig into this Iberian blackout. We want to figure out, what exactly went down.
Why it matters so much?
Yeah, why it's such a big deal and how it connects to the wider energy picture, especially that shift towards renewables.
And we've got some great sources, a detailed analysis of the blackout itself.
And also this really interesting report from Germany looking at how they're trying to keep their grid stable while pushing hard on renewables.
Okay, so where do we start? The lead up, maybe?
Good idea. Because apparently there were signs things were a bit off even before the main event, like in the half hour leading up to it.
That's right. They're called low-frequency oscillations, sort of like slow electrical ripples around 0.217 hertz between the Iberian grid, Spain and Portugal, and the main Central European grid.
Oscillations, like a wobble.
Kind of, yeah. A
Yeah.
very slow, subtle wobble in the grid's frequency. Think of it like, well, if you drop a tiny pebble in a huge, still pond, you get these very slow spreading ripples.
Okay. And this wasn't the first time.
No, they'd seen similar things back in 2016 and 2021, though maybe not quite as intense. And what's interesting this time is the frequency was even lower. Some speculate it might be because the Baltic states recently connected more tightly into the European grid.
So adding more connections might actually make these ripples slower or more pronounced somehow.
Potentially. It just underscores how interconnected everything is. A change way over there can cause effects, these sort of electrical echoes way over here.
And we have even more specific data, right, from sensors on the ground.
Yeah, ground-based sensors. Whisker Labs runs them in Madrid. And they started picking up increasing voltage fluctuations way earlier, like around 9:30 in the morning.
Voltage. So that's the electrical pressure.
Exactly. And by noon, just before it all went wrong, these fluctuations were pretty significant. A 15-volt swing happening every 1.5 seconds.
Wow. That sounds like a system really struggling.
It definitely suggests the grid was under serious stress for hours before the collapse. Real evidence of pre-collapse strain.
So having that kind of data, could it help prevent future blackouts if we could spot these signs earlier?
That's the hope, isn't it? More sophisticated monitoring, better analytics to catch these subtle patterns, maybe give operators a heads up, time to react.
Okay, so paint the picture just before the collapse. What was the grid situation like?
Well, Spain was actually generating quite a lot of power, pushing about 32 gigawatts onto the grid.
In demand?
Demand was lower, around 25 gigawatts, so they were actually exporting power.
Exporting to where?
To France and also to Morocco. Things seemed, on the surface, pretty normal, even robust.
But renewables were playing a big part that day, weren't they?
A massive part, especially solar. Depending on the source you look at, solar power was providing either 17 gigawatts, which would be a huge 60% of demand,
60%.
or another estimate puts it at 53% solar plus another 11% from wind. Either way, a very high share of renewables, predominantly solar, right before the grid failed.
That seems, well, really crucial to understanding what happened next.
It absolutely is. So then we get to the actual sequence of failure. First, there was what they call a disconnection event down in southwestern Spain. Some generation tripped offline.
And the grid handled that first hit.
Initially, yes. It actually stabilized itself almost right away, which is, what it's supposed to do.
Right.
The exact cause of that first event is still being investigated.
But it didn't end there.
No, just 1.5 seconds later. Bam! A second, much bigger disconnection event, same region.
1.5 seconds. That's incredibly fast.
Very fast. And Eduardo Prieto, he's the head of system operations at REE, the Spanish grid operator.
REE, right, the grid managers.
He said it's very likely that this second hit directly affected solar power plants. These rapid back-to-back losses of potentially large amounts of solar generation. The system just couldn't cope. It was overwhelmed.
And that's when the dominoes started falling.
That's exactly when the cascading failure kicked in. At 12.33 and 16 seconds, Central European time, the main power link between Spain and Portugal and the rest of Europe just severed, technically separated.
Okay.
Then, just about 3.5 seconds after that second disconnection event, the other main link, the one between Catalonia and southwest France, that went too. The instability was just spreading too fast.
And then the big power loss in Spain itself.
Yes, massive is the word used. 15 gigawatts. 60% of their national demand at that moment. Gone in roughly 5 seconds.
What's that say?
Which caused the local grid frequency, that 50 hertz heartbeat we talked about, to just plummet. It dropped way down to 49.2 hertz.
And that's below the safety threshold, right?
Well below. The critical threshold is usually around 49.5 hertz. Dropping that fast and that far triggers automatic protection systems.
Like what?
Inverters, the devices connecting solar and wind farms, they're designed to shut down automatically when the frequency drops like that. And even some conventional power plants might disconnect to protect themselves.
So it feeds on itself.
Yeah.
Losing power makes the frequency drop, which makes more power sources shut down.
Exactly. A rapid, self-reinforcing downward spiral of generation loss.
And that led to the widespread blackout.
Pretty much immediately. By 12.33 and 18 seconds CEST, so just after 12.3 local time, the lights were going out across Spain and Portugal.
That speed, 15 gigawatts in 5 seconds, that really highlights something about grids with lots of renewables, doesn't it?
It really does. It points to the issue of inertia. Traditional power plants have big, heavy spinning generators. They have physical inertia, like a heavy spinning top that resists changes in speed.
Right, the flywheel effect.
Exactly. It helps stabilize the grid frequency during disturbances. But inverter-based resources like solar and wind, they connect through power electronics. They don't inherently have that physical inertia.
So they can react much faster, maybe too fast, in a bad way.
If they don't have advanced controls, what we call grid-forming capabilities, they can disconnect very quickly when there's a major fault or frequency drop, potentially making the situation worse faster. This rapid collapse is a stark example of that specific technical challenge.
And the European coordinating body, ENTSO-E, they confirmed it was a total blackout.
They did. A total blackout on the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah.
And you can see it visually in the diagrams from RAE, the Spanish operator. That dramatic cliff edge drop in generation and demand right after 12:30 p.m. from 25 gigawatts down to just 10.
So it wasn't just the lights flickering off for a bit. The impacts were profound.
Oh, absolutely profound. Far beyond just not having electricity at home. The consequences just cascaded through every part of society.
I think transportation.
Completely paralyzed. Spain's entire national rail network, Renfe, shut down, left something like 35,000 people stranded.
Wow.
Madrid's big international airport, Barajas, had to drastically cut capacity. Traffic lights failed everywhere, leading to chaos on the roads. Subways and metros had to be evacuated. People trapped underground. It sounds terrifying.
And other critical infrastructure. Nuclear plants.
Thankfully, the nuclear plants went into their safe shutdown mode, self-consumption, as they call it. Their safety systems worked. But communications, that was a huge problem.
Mobile phones, internet.
Severely limited. Mobile networks were jammed or down. Internet traffic across Spain just cratered, dropped to about 17% of normal levels.
Only 17%.
Yeah. Ookla, the company that tracks internet speeds, saw this massive drop in mobile performance as backup batteries at cell towers started running out. And it wasn't even uniform. Some areas were hit harder and took longer to recover. Just a record number of failed speed tests as people desperately tried to connect.
And basic services.
Yeah.
Hospitals, businesses.
Hospitals had to switch to emergency generators, which meant, routine operations often got postponed. Most businesses just had to close. Electronic banking, forget it.
And you saw reports of panic buying, too?
Yeah, people rushing out for bread, water, batteries, the essentials. Madrid even activated its formal emergency plan, PMAM. Even big events, like the Madrid Open tennis tournament, had to stop.
Even the government wasn't spared.
Nope. The Spanish Congress, the Madrid Stock Exchange, the Catalan Parliament, even Moncloa Palace, the Prime Minister's office, all lost power. Senate activity was suspended.
And tragically, people actually died as a result.
Yes, that's the worst part. At least 7 deaths in Spain were linked directly to the blackout. Fires from candles, carbon monoxide poisoning from generators used indoors, and one particularly heartbreaking case in Valencia where someone's vital oxygen equipment failed, plus over 25 injuries in Catalonia from generator accidents. Emergency services were just swamped. Madrid got something like 5,000 calls.
And the economic cost must have been huge.
The Spanish Business Confederation estimated at around 1.6 billion euros. Just staggering.
And Portugal, was it just as bad there?
Very disruptive there, too, even if fewer fatalities were reported initially. Public transport in Lisbon basically stopped metro, commuter trains. Lisbon Airport closed to arrivals. Porto and Faro airports ran on generators, electric buses, trams, useless without power.
Same issues with phones and internet.
Pretty much. Mobile networks heavily impacted. Down detector lit up with outage reports. Hospitals on backup power. Shops, pharmacies, payment systems, many were knocked out. The water company even had to ask people to conserve water.
Shows how dependent even water systems are on power.
Absolutely. Portugal's prime minister convened an emergency meeting, declared an energy crisis, and said they'd push for an EU-level review.
And sadly, a death there too.
Yes, at least one reported a 77-year-old whose home ventilator failed when the power went out. Just awful.
It just hammers home how utterly reliant we are on electricity for, well, everything. Even things with backups eventually fail if the main outage lasts long enough.
Exactly. And the ripples went further than just Spain and Portugal.
Right, you mentioned Andorra.
Yeah, minor dips there, fixed automatically. Some brief outages in southwestern France, near the border. Morocco had internet problems because their servers rely on Spanish connections.
And Greenland. That was a surprising one.
Isn't it? Shows the hidden connections. A 6-hour telecom outage in parts of Greenland because their satellite link goes through a ground station in the Canary Islands, which are part of Spain's grid.
Incredible. You could even see it from space, right? Lack of lights.
Yeah, NASA's nighttime satellite images clearly showed the darkness over Iberia, even lingering into the morning. And that panic buying, it really points to public anxiety, maybe a lack of preparedness for this kind of large-scale failure.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at that German perspective you mentioned. They're facing similar challenges, right? Trying to keep the grid stable while adding tons of renewables.
Exactly. Germany is in the midst of this massive energy transition, the Energiewende. They've got this ambitious goal, 80% renewable electricity by 2030.
And how are they doing?
Making real progress. In 2023, renewables were over 50% of their electricity consumption. This year, 2024, it's been climbing. Higher estimates are around 55–59% gross consumption, and they even hit a record 62.7% for net public generation.
So they're already seeing times where renewables cover most of their needs.
Definitely. There are already peak periods where renewables are meeting well over 80% of demand.
Which brings us back to that core question. Can the grid stay stable without those big conventional power plants, without their rotating masses?
That's the crux of it. Those old-school plants, coal, gas, nuclear, they use huge synchronous generators that spin. That spinning mass provides inertia.
The flywheel effect again. Resistance to change.
Precisely. Renewables, solar and wind, they connect through inverters, power electronics. They don't naturally have that physical inertia built in.
So remind us, what did those rotating masses traditionally do for the grid, besides inertia?
Well, inertia was key for frequency stability, smoothing out sudden changes. It limited how fast the frequency could change the rate of change of frequency, or Rohkopf.
Lower Rohkopf gives more time to react.
Exactly. They also contributed short-circuit power, basically, the current available during a fault, which protection systems rely on to work correctly. And they played a big role in voltage control, providing reactive power to keep the grid's electrical pressure stable.
Okay, so as Germany phases out those conventional plants, they lose those services. What are the specific challenges?
Well, the big one, as we saw in Iberia, is reduced system inertia and therefore a higher Rohkopf. When a fault happens or generation trips, the frequency can change much, much faster.
Which can trip more things offline.
Potentially, yes. Protection systems might react too quickly, and the systems designed to correct the frequency, primary control, need to be way faster than they used to be.
And voltage control, you said that becomes trickier too.
Yeah, losing those big power plants means losing major sources of reactive power, which is essential for maintaining stable voltage. Plus, you have lots of smaller, decentralized renewable sources feeding into the grid, sometimes causing power to flow in directions the grid wasn't originally designed for. Germany actually expects its need for reactive power to shoot up significantly in the coming years.
What about the short-circuit power issue?
That changes too. Inverters generally provide less current during a fault compared to big spinning generators. This can mess with how protective relays the devices that detect faults operate. They might not see the fault clearly or quickly enough.
So they need new ways to protect the grid.
Exactly, revised protection strategies and making sure renewable generators have good fault ride-through, FRT, capability.
FRT, that means they stay connected during a fault.
Yeah, ideally they stay connected and even help support the grid voltage and frequency during the disturbance, rather than just tripping offline and making things worse.
And then there's just the basic variability of renewables, right? Wind and sun aren't constant.
Absolutely. That requires constant balancing by the grid operators. They use tools like redispatch, telling some plants to ramp up, others down, and managing congestion on the lines. And they have to plan for those dark doldrums periods with little wind and little sun.
Need reliable backup power for those times.
You do. Secured capacity becomes critical. And all these challenges are linked. Lower inertia makes voltage swings more likely. Variability makes control harder. It's complex.
And it puts more pressure on the distribution grids, too, the lower voltage networks.
Definitely. They're becoming much more active with power flowing both ways. That increasing need for redispatch you see in Germany. It's partly a symptom that grid expansion and flexibility options haven't quite kept pace with the boom in renewables.
Okay, so the challenges are clear,
Hmm.
but there must be solutions being developed and deployed, right? How do you actually create that stable grid?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of focus is on making those inverter-based resources, the IBRs, part of the solution, not just part of the challenge.
How so?
Well, a key technology is grid-forming inverters, or GFMs.
Grid forming as opposed to grid following.
Exactly. Most inverters today are grid following. They basically latch onto the existing grid frequency and voltage and just inject power. Grid-forming inverters are smarter. They can act like a voltage source themselves. They can actively create and maintain the grid's voltage and frequency.
Okay, that sounds significant. What can they do?
A lot of the things those old rotating generators did. They can provide synthetic or virtual inertia using their controls to react to frequency changes in a way that mimics physical inertia. This helps dampen oscillations and limit that scary row cough.
So they can slow down frequency changes.
Yes. And they can offer very fast frequency response, even faster than conventional plants sometimes. Because they're voltage sources, they actively help with voltage control and reactive power.
Could they even help restart the grid after a blackout?
Potentially, yes, especially if paired with storage, they could offer black start capability. It's a really promising technology.
But it's still developing.
It is. There are technical hurdles like how they handle fault current safely while still forming the grid. Coordinating lots of them is complex, and cost is a factor. But Germany has projects like Netzregelung 2.0 specifically working on this.
And even the regular grid-following inverters are getting smarter.
They are. Modern ones have much better controls, like that fault ride-through capability and reactive power injection we mentioned. Grid forming just takes it a step further, adding that crucial inertia-like behavior.
Storage must be a huge piece of this puzzle, too.
Absolutely essential. Battery energy storage systems, BESS, are incredibly fast. Perfect for frequency regulation, smoothing out those short-term fluctuations.
And batteries with grid-forming inverters could do even more.
Exactly. Provide synthetic inertia, voltage control, maybe black start. Battery tech is moving fast, costs are falling, though the business case still depends on market rules.
What about other storage? Pumped hydro?
Pumped hydro is great, well established for large-scale storage and regulation, but in places like Germany, there's not much potential to build new ones, so people are looking at other things.
Like hydrogen?
Yeah, power to gas to power using green hydrogen. And thermal storage. These are more for longer duration storage needs and for linking the power sector with heating or transport.
Okay, so smarter inverters, more storage.
Mm-hmm.
What else is in the toolbox?
Mhm.
Are there other ways to get those grid services?
There are. One option is rotating phase shifters, also called synchronous condensers or syncons.
Syncons, what are they?
Basically, they are those big synchronous generators from traditional power plants, but run without the turbine driving them. They just spin.
So they don't generate
Uh,
power, but they provide.
Inertia, exactly. Their spinning mass adds inertia back to the grid. They also provide short circuit strength and reactive power for voltage control.
Could you reuse old power plants for this?
That's being seriously discussed in Germany. Convert retired generators into syncons. It needs some regulatory changes, but it's a potential way to preserve some of those benefits.
Interesting. What about managing the demand side, getting consumers involved?
Demand-side management, or DSM, huge potential there. Getting industrial processes or even smart home devices like EV chargers and heat pumps to adjust their electricity use based on grid needs.
Needs smart meters and incentives, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. The infrastructure needs to be there, and people need a reason to participate. The EU already has network codes for demand response to help enable this.
And things like hydrogen production, could they help?
Yes, power to X, especially large electrolyzers making hydrogen. They're big, controllable electricity consumers. They can provide regulation services by adjusting their load. And maybe even offer grid forming or FRT capabilities in the future. Lots of research happening there.
It feels like you need a much smarter, bigger grid to handle all this complexity.
You absolutely do. Grid expansion is non-negotiable, both transmission, the big highways, and distribution, the local roads. You need to get the renewable power from where it's made to where it's needed and allow for more energy exchange.
And smart grids, is that just a buzzword?
It's essential. Real-time monitoring, digital communication, advanced controls, maybe using AI, all needed to balance supply and demand in this incredibly dynamic system.
And the rules have to change too. Grid codes, markets.
Constantly evolving. In Germany, VDE-FNN sets the technical rules for connecting to the grid, demanding better dynamic support, reactive power, fault behavior from new equipment. And there's a push for European harmonization. Plus, you need markets that actually pay for providing services like inertia or reactive power. Germany's regulator, BNetzA, is working on designing those markets.
So Germany seems to have a plan. They have these official reports and roadmaps guiding this.
They do. The grid operators, TSOs, and the regulator, BNetzA, put out regular system stability reports. They assess the situation and make recommendations.
Like what kind of recommendations?
The May 2024 report, for instance, talked about needing technical rules for big new loads like electrolyzers, maybe requiring new power plants to operate in phase shifter mode for power flow control, and seriously looking at converting retired plants into those syncons, though they noted the need for a legal basis for that.
And the government has its own big strategy document.
Yes, the Economics Ministry, BMWK, released its Roadmap System Stability Roadmap in late 2023. It's a key policy paper.
What's the core idea?
The central pillar is getting grid forming capability into renewable energy sources. The roadmap basically says new assets have to take over these stability functions from old plants. They even set a timeline, aiming for all new plants connecting from 2025 onwards to contribute to stability.
And research institutions are feeding into this too, like Fraunhofer.
Heavily involved. Fraunhofer Eyes and IE do tons of work on the technical side, proving 100% renewables is feasible, but stressing the need for flexibility, storage, DSM, sector coupling. They work on inverter controls, regional strategies, grid optimization.
Any other key players?
Agora Energiewende is a very influential think tank providing analysis and policy advice, often with a European view. They look at solutions like batteries, HVDC lines, flywheels, DSM. VDE-FNN, as we said, sets the technical rules. Their roadmap to the Climate Protection Grid 2030 is important, plus many other academic projects like Ariadne, national academies, all contributing research on pathways, technologies, resilience.
So it sounds like there's a pretty strong consensus in Germany on the basic needs. Grid forming, storage, flexibility, grid expansion.
Broadly, yes. There seems to be good alignment between the key actors like the regulator and the standards bodies. The debates now are more about the nitty-gritty technical specs, how fast to implement, how exactly to design the markets, the right mix of solutions.
And it's constantly evolving, right? With the European dimension too.
Absolutely. These roadmaps aren't static. Technology changes, they learn more, and coordination across Europe is becoming increasingly critical.
Okay, so there's a plan, there's consensus.
Yeah.
But it can't be easy. There must still be big challenges, uncertainties.
Oh, for sure. Huge challenges remain. Just scaling up these key technologies, grid forming inverters, batteries, electrolyzers, and getting the cost down further, that's a massive industrial and economic task.
And keeping the lights on during those dark doldrums.
That remains a critical concern. Ensuring enough reliable capacity when wind and solar output is low for extended periods. Germany's Federal Audit Office has actually raised concerns about this, about having enough secured capacity.
And building the grid itself. That takes time and money.
A ton of time and money. Planning and financing those huge grid infrastructure projects is complex, often faces delays, and needs to be coordinated with planning for generation and storage.
What about R&D? Still more needed.
Definitely. Optimizing grid forming controls, finding new ways to protect the grid with all these electronics, using AI for smarter operation. Lots of ongoing work needed.
And the costs. Are these stability measures expensive?
They are adding up. Germany is already spending billions each year on managing grid congestion and procuring system services. Those costs are rising and eventually feed into electricity bills.
Which really underlines the need for cooperation, doesn't it, between countries?
Yeah.
Absolutely. No country is an island, electrically speaking, especially in Europe. Harmonizing rules and coordinating investments across borders is crucial for cost effectiveness and security.
So, what are the make-or-break factors for success here?
Speed is one. Accelerating deployment of renewables, storage, and grids, getting grid-forming tech widely adopted, adapting regulations quickly, embracing digitalization, strong European cooperation, and crucially, maintaining public support.
What are the risks if things go wrong?
Project delays are a big one. Underestimating how much flexibility the system actually needs. Technical integration problems cropping up. System costs spiraling, becoming too dependent on specific global supply chains for batteries or components. And of course, cybersecurity remains a constant threat.
It sounds like a real balancing act, speed versus cost versus reliability.
It absolutely is. Those high congestion management costs are kind of a symptom of the system's straining to keep up. And maintaining social acceptance, making sure people understand the changes, believe they're fair, see the benefits, that's going to be key, especially as costs rise or new dependencies emerge.
So wrapping this all up, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the key point is that, yes, a stable grid powered mainly by renewables without that traditional inertia seems technically possible. There's broad expert agreement on that.
Yeah.
But it requires this massive, coordinated, and fast transformation across technology, infrastructure, markets, regulations. Everything needs to adapt. And we can definitely learn from both the warnings of events like the Iberian blackout and the strategic planning efforts we see in places like Germany.
Which leaves a really interesting question for you listening at home.
Yeah, maybe think about the resilience of the infrastructure where you live. How prepared is your community for potential disruptions? And what role does planning, investment, innovation play in ensuring that energy future stays reliable, both on the grand scale and closer to home?
What questions does all this raise for you about where energy is heading and how we keep it stable along the way?